Okay. All right, Jesse, it's 10, so I've started recording. And we have students coming in, so I'll follow your lead.
Hi, y'all. Welcome in. We're just waiting to see if we get any more participants this morning. We'll probably start around 10:02.
And Jesse, I think we need the next, I think it's the next slide because we had it for session 5, right? I think right now the one that I'm seeing is session 4.
Oh, I think it's just mislabeled.
Oh, okay, let's relabel it. Yeah. I think it still says Thursday. No, don't worry, don't worry. It's just things we can do while people are arriving. And actually, while people arrive, I think I'll just get us, oriented to what we wanted to do this week, because I think that that part is, it's not as important as the introduction that you'll do, Jassy, but it could save us some time to get going with it. So welcome, everyone. It's really nice to see a lot of your faces. I'm using my gallery view, and I'm seeing a lot of your wonderful, wonderful, brilliant faces. It's been really great to spend the week with you, learning from different professors and researchers and activists, organizers around the country, who have been really generous with their time and their brilliance, teaching us about different systems of oppression and really giving us some tools that we could use as members of the High Potential Program to understand our experiences at St. Mary's College of California and beyond. So I just wanted to remind us of the goals that we were hoping these 5 sessions would do. As we welcome Dr. Ginger Hunter, who Jassy will formally introduce, I want us to just remember these main things we wanted you to take away, so that you're keeping those in mind as we begin today's session. And we conclude these 5 SAIL academic resiliency sessions. So one of the things we wanted was for you to be able to walk away every day with a tangible framework or concept or tool or experience that you could then use to apply to understand and engage your own educational experiences as minoritized and marginalized students whose lives are shaped by intersecting and mutually constituting systems of oppression. So this week we've learned a bit about race as a social construct that was invented to justify oppression, but also as a concept that really does impact the way that people are treated in this country. We've learned about immigrant rights. We've learned about the experiences of undocumented community members, both from the Asian American community and the Latinx community. We started the week with an Indigenous scholar reminding us that we are in Ohlone land here in the Bay Area, and reminding us of the importance of honoring and respecting our ancestors, and also particularly the stewards of the land, the original stewards of the land that we stand on. We also, I'm trying to remember, I think I've touched on everything. We've also remembered that yesterday was an important day in terms of the violence that has been perpetuated against Asian Americans in the United States. And we're closing today with Dr. Ginger Hunter, who's going to pull all these things together to help us really think about the history, historicizing higher education, and thinking about, what does it mean for higher education to be an equitable space. So we're hoping that you walk away again with something from each day. We're hoping that you see yourselves and each other as resourceful, brilliant students with ancestors and legacies of struggle and resilience who have, like Mary said yesterday, the power to make change in your lives and in each other's lives, and that you feel connected and nourished by your own knowledge and your family's knowledges and wisdoms and ancestors' wisdom, as powerful scholars that you are, as activists, as people who will make change on our campus and beyond, as people who have been minoritized and marginalized by higher education, yet as people that are actively making change within and beyond this context. So these are the three things. I know I talked a lot, but there's three things, right? That you take away these tools, that you see yourself as resourceful, brilliant students, and that you feel nourished and connected to each other, and that you know and feel connected to make change. So with that, I wanna ask Jassy to welcome our amazing guest speaker for today, who's also a dear friend. And I'm just really excited that we're coming to this moment in our time together. So welcome, everyone.
Thank you, Dr. Russo-Ha. So yes, I have the honor of welcoming our guest speaker for today for our Academic Resilience session number 5. And our guest speaker today, let's see if I can get to the next slide, is Dr. Virginia Hunter. Dr. Virginia Hunter was a high school dropout who then attended community college part-time before transferring to university. Dr. Hunter was a Pell eligible student who always worked through college. She holds an education doctorate, so an EDD, from the University of Pennsylvania in higher education, and a master's and BA from the University of New Mexico, Albuquerque. Currently, she is a senior research associate at Researcher for Action in Philadelphia. In this role, she studies inequity in higher education as a state policy evaluator, identifying how public policies impact underserved students and trying to identify ways to make the state policies more equitable. Currently, Dr. Hunter co-directs a study on state-level efforts to recognize college credit for prior learning. Past studies she has led or contributed to focused on policies and topics such as the HBCU, so historically Black students, career choices, college affordability, and state-level quality assurance and improvement efforts. So everyone, welcome Dr. Virginia Hunter.
Hi, everyone, and thank you so much, Jazzy. That was such a nice introduction. I'm really excited to be here and excited to see all of you. And I don't know, I love talking about higher education, and I don't know, love new college students. So I'm so excited for you guys, and I'm so eager to talk to you and hear about anything that you want to talk about, and hope that you keep in touch with me as you move on through your college careers. So today I was hoping we could just talk a little bit. Let me see if I can figure out how to share my screen. Oops, that's not working.
Jassy, is Ginger a co-host?
Oh yeah, I think that's not the problem. I think it's me that's the problem.
Cool.
All right, there, you guys see that?
Yeah, we see it.
So today I'm hoping just to tell you a little bit about my educational experience and why I study higher education, a little bit about my career and what I do, and then also talk about racism in college admissions policies. I think that it's something that a lot of students have interest in since you all just went through the admissions process. And a lot of people don't really think about why we have the admissions policies that we do today. So I'm not super familiar with your admissions policies, but I imagine you all had to write personal essays, get letters of recommendations, maybe take the SAT or ACT or some other tests, submit your high school transcripts, and do all these things to get into St. Mary's. So I'm hoping we can talk a little bit about why we have to do all those things to get into college. And then hopefully, and then you guys will break into small groups and maybe come up with some better policies, some policies that are more equitable, maybe easier for students, and really promote social justice and not exclusion, which is what has really built a lot of our current admissions processes. So just to tell you a little bit about myself, a lot of my interest in education really came from my mom, and my mom grew up on a Native American reservation, the Dene Reservation, also known as the Navajo Reservation. So there's a photo of my mom and some of her classmates. And in the 60s, tribal schools, even though they were on Native American reservations, were still white run. So white people created the curriculum, they created the schools, white students sat at the front of the class. It was very much a system built on white supremacy, even though these schools were operating on Native American reservations. And to me, that seemed really strange, because as a child, I thought that Native American reservations were, a place for Native Americans where they could, have their own freedoms and liberties. But really, it's always been, a system of oppression and to try to disenfranchise the wealth of Native Americans. So just a little bit of history here. In the 1830s, Congress passed the Indian Removal Act, which forced most Native Americans off their land. 1862, President Lincoln signed the Homesteading Act, which was basically reallocating Native American land and wealth to white people. The Indian Citizenship Act in 1924, if you think about that's less than 100 years ago, and that granted Native Americans U.S. citizenship. So even though Native Americans were here long before white colonists, they weren't considered citizens until less than 100 years ago. And then in 1972, things started to change a little bit, and the Indian Education Act gave Native Americans decision-making over their own formalized education. And of course, it sounds strange to say that, because of course, all indigenous populations have their own systems of education and are educated, and it's more that people weren't allowed to have agency over their own formalized instruction. So, and then just telling you, so my mom's background really influenced why I became interested in education. And even though she grew up in a system of white supremacy that really gave her a lot of privileges, when she entered college, it was still a struggle for her. She was a first-generation student. Women weren't really, very prevalent in higher education until the 70s. And it took her 10 years to finish her degree. But she really hung in there, and it was really worth it. So a little bit about me. So I grew up on the border of Mexico, so in the El Paso and Juarez community. It is, it existed as a community for thousands of years before it was split by the border. And for a lot of people and families growing up on the border, including my own, it really is more of a fluid community. So, I have aunts and cousins who are Mexican citizens, that would make daily trips over to the US. A lot of families on the border, as many of you probably know, treat it really as one community. And it's really like arbitrary national borders that have created some opportunities for other people and fewer opportunities for others. And, in New Mexico, a lot of education based policies were created because of racism. So notables in 1912, New Mexico was vying for statehood, and it had always been a predominantly Latinx state or territory. And then one of the conditions for statehood was that classrooms could only teach in English. So that, right there gives English-speaking households, predominantly white people, real benefits in education. And that was something that I really benefited from. And even though I was a pretty low-income student, having grown up in an English-speaking household, that gave me a real advantage in the classroom over some of my classmates, which is completely unfair and completely arbitrary. What language you speak doesn't have anything to do with your intelligence, but yet it still has real reflections on your grades, you know, how you're viewed in the school, how you progress through school, and your chances for college. So things have gotten a little bit better. In 1989, New Mexico declared itself an English plus state, and they're moving towards a lot more bilingual education. In New Mexico, they do try to protect language rights, and you do not have to speak English to serve on a jury or hold public office, which is pretty awesome. But there's still a lot more work to be done. And again, like my mom, even though I benefited from systems of white supremacy and was given a lot of advantages, college was still really hard for me. It took me 7 years to get through. I attended 2 community colleges, 3 different universities. It really took me a long time to make my way through college, but it is so worth it. So if at any point any of you ever have to stop out for a bit, you know, just get back in there and finish eventually. It's really the best thing you can do for yourselves. Okay, so now let's talk a little bit about, and if anyone ever has any questions, feel free to stop me. I know it can be kind of hard to stop people when we're all virtual, but, you know, feel free to jump in with any questions. And I'm kind of going through quickly because I want everyone to have time to talk in their small groups. But so, you know, I study public policy mostly in higher education, but I also have a lot of interest in institutional policy. And so really, you know, there's different levels of structures and often structures of oppression that exist. And some are institutional level, some are state level, some are federal level, you know, depending on the sort of, you know, place you're at and the influences around you. It can really impact how you get into and through college. So I want to go through a few of those. So as I mentioned in the beginning of my talk, you know, a lot of the admissions policies that institutions still use today were founded on racism. So Harvard was always a pretty elitist institution. And in 1905, they adopted the college entrance examination board test, which was something similar to the SAT. So it was really a way for students to take a standardized test and then submit those scores to Harvard for entry. Harvard wasn't thinking about how that might make their student population less white. So 20 years later, 1/5 of Harvard students were Jewish, and Harvard considered this a crisis, and they needed to fix it. So Harvard, Yale, and Princeton moved from a merit-based, so a system based that was supposedly based on intelligence. I mean, we all know standardized tests have a lot of issues and don't really measure intelligence, to an admission systems based on what they called character. And so they started requiring that students submit things like references, personal essays, photographs, list of their extracurricular activities, their religion, their race, things like that, basically so that the admission staff could decide who not to admit to make sure that they continued only admitting white Protestant men. They even had a physical characteristics checklist that they would meet applicants in person. And some institutions still do have, you know, personal meetings where they meet students before they admit them. Yale had one that included the height of the student applying to Yale, and would often give preference to men over 6 feet tall. So like, people wonder why we have this, you know, sort of mental relationship to leaders being tall white men. It's because they were the ones who were admitted into elite colleges, right? They literally admitted men because they were tall and not because they were smart, which sounds absurd, but is true. And it was only in 1965 that they stopped using a physical characteristics checklist to admit students into Yale. So this is an excerpt from an article that I really like. It's called Getting In by Malcolm Gladwell. I'll give you guys a second to read this and just kind of let it sink in. So, you know, a lot of the things that students still have to go through is more about who not to admit to school. You know, and I think it's important to scrutinize every institutional policy and every state policy and think about, you know, what is really the most equitable way, who really benefits from all of these decisions, right? So today, who benefits from a personal essay, and who benefits from you listing your extracurricular activities on your college application? Who benefits from the SAT? These are all really important questions that we should all be asking, because a lot of policies and programs historically in America were created to keep certain groups out. So there was a time in the 60s and early 70s when policymakers were trying to reverse this history of exclusion. And in 1965, Congress passed the Higher Education Act and an executive order that promoted affirmative action. So, encouraging colleges to let in student populations that reflected their local populations. So, if you're in a state where 40% of your population are Latinx, making sure that 40% of the students that you're admitting are also Latinx. So within a few years, there was a lot of court pushback, basically white families saying that it was unfair. Still today, we have 8 states who have statewide bans on affirmative action in higher education in all areas, California being one of them, which is really unfortunate. In states that have banned affirmative action, a lot of those gains in college access for Black, Latinx, and Native American students, were reversed. So there was some progress in the 60s and 70s with really opening the doors to higher education. And then a lot of that was reversed in many states. So state policies are also a contributing factor into who gets in and through college. And this is what I study. So I really focus on what state level policies can and can't do for Black students, Native American students, Latinx students, and low income students. So if you look at this chart, it's pretty alarming. And so this is degree attainment, so associate's and bachelor's degrees for Latinx populations by state. So if you happen to be Latinx and growing up in Idaho, you only have a 12% chance of completing college. If you live in New Hampshire, your chances of completing college are 3 times that. So just where you happen to, be born, live, go to high school can have a huge impact on how you get into and through college. And, that shouldn't be the case, right? Like these structures shouldn't limit people's life outcomes so dramatically. So everything we've just talked about, so, stripping wealth from Black, Latinx, Native American communities, racist education policies in K-12, racist admissions policies, ineffective or racist state policies, they all make a really big difference in, who gets into and completes college. I know it's like the 50th time I said that, but I'm really trying to drive it home. So looking at this graph of, comparing Black and white students, high school students by income, if you look, low-income Black students only have a 4.3% chance of getting into a selective college, while wealthy white students have a 40% chance of getting into college, right? It's really clear that there's something wrong with these structures and something wrong with higher education that needs to be radically changed to make sure that, people who are low income or, Black or brown have equal chances of getting into selective colleges or any college. So there's a lot of work to be done. A lot of people are working on this. I know a lot of you are going into college and going to be community leaders and community activists, and are maybe thinking about your best place to fit into the world and fit into making change. For me, like being a really shy person that I am, for me, being out in the community just wasn't something that I could do well with. So I became a researcher, an applied researcher. So I basically create research that draws attention to social problems that then activists can leverage to create more change. So, I know all of you want to make a difference in the world, and there's a place for all of you to make a difference because there are so many problems that need to be fixed, and so many challenges that will take all of us working together to fix. So, just to recap really quickly, getting into and through college really has almost nothing to do with your intelligence. It's more strongly connected to family, wealth, and race than anything else. It's highly influenced by institutional admissions and academic policies, you know, and I don't want to paint all institutions in a bad light because there's huge variation in institutions these days. Like some institutions are really inclusive, they care about social justice, they care about admitting a diverse student population, they care about serving all students. And some institutions are still, you know, very exclusionary and only want to let in wealthy students and only want to let in white students or students that they feel will graduate and then give money back to the institution because fundraising, you know, has become a big issue for institutions. But, you know, when you aggregate all the data together, we still have a huge problem in, you know, creating a diverse student body. And all this is also dependent on state policies. And if any of you want to talk, I love talking about these things. So if any of you want to talk, I'll share my email information and want to talk more about state policies. I always love talking about those things and I'm happy to connect on all of those things. So, you know, policies, institutional policies, public policies, all built the system of inequality over hundreds and hundreds of years. And it's up to us to fix it. And one of the ways we can do that is through creating new policies. So maybe I should stop and see if anyone has any questions real quick or anything you want to revisit in the slides.
That's great, thank you.
Let's give it a second in case anyone's talking and on mute, and then
And
realizing that
if you
they're
feel
on
shy, like if you feel like you don't want to, you know, talk, you could also text it in the group chat, and you can contribute that way and ask questions to Dr. Hunter.
All right, so if there's no questions, which is totally fine too. I'm a really shy student, so I never ask questions publicly. Alicia probably remembers from class, I never spoke. I tried not to ever speak unless a professor made me. Okay, so I'm hoping that we can break it into small groups and think about a few things. So, you know, why do you think universities continue to use these admissions practices they do? I mean, people who work in admissions know full well that they're really deciding who not to admit, not who they want to admit. But why do institutions keep operating this way? And who benefits from these things? Who benefits from the SAT? Who benefits from having letters of recommendations? Who benefits from personal essays, you know, extracurricular activities? You know, in high school, I never got to participate in any extracurricular activities because I was always working. But, you know, working at Dairy Queen doesn't get you into Harvard, right? Being captain of your lacrosse team or your soccer team gets you into Harvard. So who really benefits from these admissions practices? And then what would a more equitable, race-conscious admissions policy look like to you? How would you decide who gets in and who doesn't get in? Right? Someday you guys are all going to be policymakers and leaders and community organizers. So, you know, how would you do it differently? What would be a better way to do all this? And so I think the plan is to break into small groups for about 15 minutes and have groups, you know, talk about these issues quickly and then try and come up with a set of policies that might be a better way, an admissions practice that might be radically different than what we all have now. And then come back to the full group with a couple of groups sharing out their new vision for a better way.
Thank you.
Alrighty, I think we have everyone back. Welcome back, everyone. I'm hoping that you all had a really great discussion and learned from each other and came up with some really good options. What we'll do, and Dr. Hunter, let me know if this is okay with you. Did you want to do anything at the end, or do you want to just have students share?
Because we probably don't have time for all of the groups to share, Ginger. Yeah. So maybe.
Yeah. I would just want like 2 minutes at the end.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, so if we could get a couple groups to share, that would be great. Peer mentors, maybe you might want to volunteer up some groups. That would be awesome.
And if it's possible for folks, show us your brilliant faces so that Dr. Hunter can also see you as you're sharing and we can see each other as we would if we were in the same room. Okay, so yeah, peer mentors. maybe Jesse, you did really amazing yesterday when you were just calling on different numbers of, so maybe you choose different peer mentors who are all brave and happy to share, and then we move forward faster.
Yeah, well, I was in group 1, so Gloria, Josiah, Isha, I think there was one more person, Leilani. If any of y'all want to share what we talked about, go for it, please.
We talked about like how people have like I guess larger amount of resources are often more benefit more from I guess like seeking higher education because they can have the resources to do so, and other people don't necessarily have that, and they're not given as much of the opportunity because of like they're not understanding a test score, they're not getting the repetition of test scores and reviewing like letters and all that stuff um, that'll help them seek higher education.
Thank you for sharing, Josiah. The next breakout room was breakout room 2. That was with peer mentor Anihi, if anyone would like to share from that group.
I was in the group, so I can share. Or somebody else doing that?
I can share.
Great.
So, we talked about pretty much the same thing that group 1 talked about of, about how like people with less resources would probably get less like lower test scores, and people who don't have help with like personal essays could be struggling a lot more. And we were really talking about how we could fix those issues. And Dr. Virginia Hunter, she helped us with like more questions to answer about like what about a lottery system, and we were coming up with opinions like we don't really like lottery because some students work harder than others, and also probably like having questions being answered such as like what support did you receive and all that.
Thank you, Michelle. I wanted to ask if anyone from our group had, because there's something we talked about in our group that related to what Michelle just shared, and I wondered if that might be, I just think it's really fitting, if maybe Gloria, you felt comfortable sharing some of that, that question of like, how do we decide who gets in?
So we talked about like how admissions decides who gets to get in, and we were asked what we would do if we were in that position, and I said that I would admit someone if I saw that they went through a lot of struggles, yet they were able to overcome them all.
And the question that I asked, thank you, Gloria, was, what do we think, do we think that education is a human right? And if we think education is a human right and we believe in education's power, then do we think some people should be excluded from education? So I think that asking us to consider what are the assumptions as we think of solutions, what are the assumptions that are under those solutions? And so, do we believe that some people shouldn't go to college? And why do we believe that, right? Okay, moving on. Just want to raise that question.
Thank you, both of you. That was, I think that we can go on to the next group, and if people want to build upon what Gloria and Dr. Rusoha were talking about, that'd be great. I think the next group was with peer mentor Diego. I think also peer mentor Arturo was also in that, but I think he accidentally left the thing, so.
I can go. We basically talked about like the same thing as group 1 and 2. We said that like we would like look past scores and grades and kind of look at like what the struggles that they went through. And like for the first question, like why do we think universities continue the admissions practices they do? We just said that like so far it's worked in their way, like whatever they accept, like we talked about like them getting funds from like people that graduated from that school. So if they got the results they wanted from that, why would they want change? Yes.
Really powerful.
And then we have the next group, which is breakout room 4 with peer mentors Christopher and St. Clair.
I can speak a little bit from our group. So basically, like forgive me if I mess up in my speech, but basically, we were talking about how like the universities don't want to change because it's kind of hard to change, like especially after like the system's been here for a really, really long time. And one of us were talking about how if we decide to change something, we could easily lose our jobs, or we can like get into like the part where we won't ever get hired again. Because like there's always that possibility where people won't always agree with you, and they'll be like, no, like we do not want that idea, and like the only way to exterminate that idea is to fire them. And we're not saying that it's always there, but there's always like that possibility that not everybody's going to like your idea. And we were always talking about how we all come from different backgrounds, about how the SAT was kind of there to say, hey, we're all on like the same level, and let's see who has like the highest score out of this many. And it's kind of just like, no, not everybody gets benefit from the SAT, because like some people, they don't get to study till like a month or like 3 months before the SAT, like I did. Like my SAT experience was horrible because I was diagnosed with ADHD my sophomore year. I didn't start studying until like my junior year, which is like where it was like really crucial. And that was kind of horrible because like a lot of people have to go straight home after school to watch their little siblings. They have to like not do extracurriculars. They have to just do so much that the SAT is not as important to them. And in all honesty, the only reason, like the only way I could think that like people who can get in and who cannot get in is thinking of different ways of sending in your application to college. Like my idea is looking at like having children, or not having children, having teenagers send in like a video of like their entire life, like them talking to the camera, or if writing's perfect for them, having them send in an essay, or having them do an audio of saying like, hi, my name is Inez Ramirez. I'm applying to this college and I want to go here for this reason. There's different ways to send in an application. And I hope that in the future, we can like hopefully just like make a movie of like their entire life, like looking at a video of just what they're going through. Because in all honesty, not all teenagers are good at writing. I would know, I am not. So the essay process was really difficult in general.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Inez.
Yeah, I think that your perspective is extremely powerful and extremely relatable. I know I see a lot of peer mentors nodding their heads as well as other students, and so thank you for sharing that. We are coming down on some time before the 11 o'clock end, and I know that we have 2 more breakout rooms, so maybe if one person from either of those breakout rooms would like to share, that's breakout room 5 with peer mentor Ashley, and then breakout room 6 with peer mentors Alondra and Daisy.
I was part of breakout room number 5, and we mostly discussed about question number 3. We kind of said like to not incorporate standardized testing would help a lot because that shouldn't reflect who you are as a whole person. It's just a small portion of your time. And then also we said AP classes shouldn't affect that because the same classes aren't offered in all the high schools, so you never have like the same opportunities. And then we also said that we shouldn't have to put like how much income each family makes. So I think those 3 things shouldn't really be part of what makes a decision for college.
I was part of Alondra's group, and we thought the reason, or like the drawbacks from the way the SAT and the standardized testing kind of implies towards people of lower income is just that people of higher income can afford to like buy tutors, and they have more resources to study for the test, which gives them an advantage. And the way the test is catered is like it's more like study oriented, and if you know the skills and the content that's on the test, like that's how you pass. It's not really based off of intellect. So we thought that it was just kind of almost unequal and unbalanced, like the way the process is.
I know we are running short time, so I want to invite Dr. Hunter to, comment and help us close. And as I do that, I also want to remind us of this aspect of the question, which was also getting us to think about race-conscious policies, right? And so, Dr. Hunter, given that, we've really centered a lot of race and racism and structural racism across the week. And I'd love to hear from you as we close on adding that layer.
Yeah, so these are really hard questions, and admissions officers are under a lot of pressure to make institutional budgets because they are responsible for making sure that colleges are funded, which perpetuates the cycle of students with the most resources getting in, which is wrong. And there's got to be a better way to both fund institutions and to admit students. I am a very strong supporter of affirmative action. I do think that there should be quotas on that institutions must adhere to admit diverse student body populations, and that and real penalties for institutions who don't admit a diverse class. Making sure that nationwide 40% of high school students qualify for Pell or low-income students, but most elite institutions only have between 7 and 10% low-income students. I think that institutions should lose their ability to accept federal financial aid if they don't admit 40% of their student body population as low income, and I believe the same for race. I personally also support a lottery approach to admissions, right? Like, life is already a lottery. You can't choose who you're born to or where you're born to or what kind of systems of oppression you're born into. So why not, make college admissions a lottery as well? Because I do believe that even students who aren't that hardworking or aren't that smart deserve a quality education, personally. And so I just wanted to end a little bit on like what we can do, what you all can do. So I think the best thing you can do is to finish college, no matter how long it takes or how hard it is. It's really one of the best things you can do for yourself. And then you should, work in your community and help others enroll and complete college, right? Like, you've all sat here and talked about all of the biases that go into SATs and, letters of recommendation and letters, personal essays. So, go back into your community and mentor and help other people complete their college applications, right? If really having guidance from people who are in college helps other people get into college. And then ask your institution really hard questions, right? Institutional leaders listen to students. I know as college students, you might not feel like you have a lot of power right now, especially if you're wanting to tackle big challenges in the world, like food insecurity or housing insecurity. Those are huge problems that often we feel really helpless to address. But as students, you're not helpless. It might not feel like it right now, but if enough students call an institution out for something and make poor institutional behavior public, they'll change. Like, institutions actually do respond to students. So while you're in college, you should really leverage that power and make your institution more equitable. I think you guys are lucky to go to an institution that cares about social justice, but not every institution is perfect, and there are probably a lot of ways that St. Mary's can improve. And then just throughout your lives, like, question everything, right? Like, a lot of exclusionary policies and practices like admissions, we've just had them for so long that people stop thinking about them, right? Like, we've had the same admissions processes for over 100 years, some of them longer. And people just take things for granted, thinking that's the way things have to be, but they don't, right? We can change these systems. And the first step is, really asking, like, why are things the way they are? What's the history here? Who benefits from this, and what can we do to change it? So I know you all will just keep asking those questions as you move through college and through life. And, you can always get my email address from Dr. Rusoha. I'm really happy to talk to you guys about college or grad school or careers in higher education. There's a lot of opportunities in higher education and a lot of opportunities for doing social justice work in higher education that people often don't think about. So if you want to talk through any of these things with me, I would love to hear from you guys. And I know you guys are going to do amazing things in the world. And it was a real privilege to talk to you and hear about your ideas and see all of your great faces. And thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hunter. I wish we could hear us all applauding, but we have everyone on mute. Thank you so much. I also want to remind everyone that Dr. Hunter shared some